Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at the exile and the return from the exile. So first off, when you've got the southern tribes now, which is Judah and Benjamin, but remember Benjamin doesn't get mentioned much because it's really small, they get taken into exile in Babylon. Now what does that exile look like? What's it like? Well, if you want an idea of what it's like, you can read the book of Daniel and you can see what life was like for Daniel, who was an exile then living in Babylon. You can see how difficult, what a challenge his life was, and for his mates as well, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And you can see that there was a challenge there to compromise and not serve God, but to be involved in false worship that they had in Babylon. You can also read the book of Lamentations, and you can see how sad the Israelites were when they were in exile, that they're no longer in the land, because the land had huge significance for them. And then in 586 BC, when the temple got destroyed, the exiles who were in Babylon, when they would have heard that the temple was destroyed, they would have been totally gutted. Because it's like the temple's been destroyed, that was where God's presence was, that was God's place. So now you've got God's people out of the land, and God's place, the temple, has been destroyed, and it'd be like, what's going to happen now? It would be a terribly depressing time for them. And if you read Psalm 137, Psalm 137 would be a psalm that was probably written after the exile, and it's looking back on it and saying, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Yeah, you might think of a popular song that goes like that. So it's saying that the Israelites, when they was in Babylon, they wept and they thought back to when they was at Jerusalem, and they weep. And then it says, there on the poplars we hung our harps. So it means on the trees we had our harps, but we hung them up on the trees. We wouldn't play them because there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So basically the Babylonians are tormenting them, saying, you've got these psalms that you sing about Jerusalem and how great it is, and we've just destroyed it. Now sing us one of your songs. You know, we can't hear you singing anymore. You know, that kind of thing you get at a football ground, right? And the psalms say here, Psalm 137, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? So the exile was a terrible time for the Israelites, a very depressing time. And they can't sing songs about Jerusalem anymore. So the question now is, are we going to see the prophecies fulfilled? If you remember when we looked at the prophets, we saw that there's prophecies that said, one day you're going to come out of exile. One day you're going to be gathered. You're going to be put back in God's place, and you're going to be given a new heart, and you're going to be able to follow God's laws, which you couldn't follow before, which is why you got exiled. So are we going to see the tables turn? So what happens is the Babylonian Empire, they exile the Israelites, but a few years later the next superpower comes along, which is the Persian Empire. So if you remember, earlier we had the Assyrian Empire, then the Babylonians come along and they become boss, and then the Persians come along and they become boss. And the king of Persia is called Cyrus. And what happens is when Cyrus comes on the scene and he beats the Babylonians, what he does is he actually allows the Israelites to go home if they want to. And it's interesting because it actually says that God is the one who moves Cyrus's heart